With the North Node in the 7th degree of Taurus, we're looking at a change of direction, the push of the past being diverted to a new direction by a powerful spiritual experience, implanting hope for the future. In order to achieve our potential, we need to awaken into honest self-realization. So this is the Woman of Samaria, and it's to do with a breakthrough to a new spiritual level. A new way of life, one that demonstrates that we are evolving towards realization, can only ever arise out of the ashes of what has been assimilated of the old. In order to receive knowledge of the creative potential of spirit, we must move away completely from what of the old life did not serve our aspirations to progress. The Woman of Samaria. She was thought to be of ill repute, of low moral standing, because she had more than one man, either sequential relationships or simultaneous, or even charging money for it. The stories differ. And yet, Jesus revealed himself to her. And this changed her whole way of being. Now, if we take that metaphor into our own lives, we examine the shift of spiritual consciousness that occurs when we have some new experience which profoundly influences our take on life and our take on ourselves and where we're going. And we think, no, we can't do that anymore. That's not okay. And that might be on the level of the Woman of Samaria, where you've really been doing something that's self-detrimental, and also, coincidentally, shall we say, against the common morality of your local community. But it's deeper than that. It's that we know that we're doing ourselves no good, that we can't continue this way. It's unsustainable. And to some extent, I think all of us have that to face. We really certainly have that to face at some point in our lives. And it probably is most of the time. In other words, we are, all of us, doing something that really we know we shouldn't be doing. That can be to do with sexual morality. It can be to do with diet or lack of exercise. There's all manner of ways in which we are self-defeating. And what we're discussing here is the shift in spiritual consciousness that can occur when we let go of that which is debilitating us. Sufism teaches of something called the Mapam Shift. It's an Arabic word, Maqam, means table. The suggestion is that we go up and up and up and up and up, perhaps little by little, so almost imperceptibly increasing our sense of the spiritual self, our commitment to spirituality, little by little on the path. And yet there are some moments that we're not just going up a gentle escarpment anymore. There's a jump, a dimensional shift in consciousness, a eureka experience perhaps, or a major challenge to our emotional nature that we have to put up with. It could be grief. It could be spiritual exhilaration. But it's big. And I think we're talking about one of those here, a major Maqam shift. All of us go through the increase, the gentle increase in life. That's what life gives us almost automatically, because we learn stuff all the time. And even though it might seem as though one lifetime is going downhill, we've lived it very badly. In some cases, we can see that people are not really progressing spiritually. Nevertheless, they are learning. We cannot fail to learn, and eventually it contributes to a later Maqam shift, even if later means in another incarnation. And yet some of us, and in fact perhaps most of us who are studying the Sabian Symbols, have some level of commitment to learning more about spirituality, learning more about exactly who we are, therefore being honest about what's going wrong, what's not quite going right, and so on. These are qualities of somebody with a serious chance of a major Mapam shift. And this is all backed up by the urgency of the moment. As we speak, there is tremendous risk of nuclear proliferation for political reasons that I'm not going to go into now, but it's very likely that over the next 10 years, the world will become significantly more dangerous on that level. And there will be food shortages and that kind of thing, which I've spoken of before, and this is all inevitable because of demographic shifts that have already occurred some decades ago. It's inescapable, some of this. Now, when the world is in crisis, such as times of war, there is a side benefit to that awful experience. And that side benefit is that there is a major awakening. If you go back to the time before the last war, the Second World War, you go back to the 30s and the 20s, people were not very awake. They didn't have much of an idea of the nature of reality, what's going on politically, what's going on economically, what you can do, the possibilities of opportunity, and so on. Very little was understood of that. There wasn't a lot of tourism in that time. We didn't do a lot of traveling, and there wasn't a lot of modern spiritual teachings at that time. The theosophists were strong for a very small number of people, but that was all there was. Now it's everywhere. Even in the business world, you can go on workshops and they use terminology like yin and yang in the corporate sector. Everything has changed since then. If you go back previous to that, before the First World War, and it's immeasurably worse in terms of awakened people. There weren't any, hardly. The elite who could afford to spend time studying, such as the theosophists, who were small in number. And we see, therefore, that war awakens the species, World War, in a big way. And that's what we're facing now. Not necessarily a war, let's hope not, but there will be a major crisis in the next few years. And during that time, this is a tremendous opportunity for those of us who are trying to awaken further. This is the time for Mapam Shift. We just open our eyes and we see the truth of what's going on. And we see that to some significant extent. And those of us who are awakened fully will understand that that's to a complete extent. Who we are internally is reflected externally in our circumstances. So if you clean up your act, if you purify your being, if you understand that optimism, faith, constant affirmation of the light moment by moment, this is the only safe survival strategy. When you get that, and you live that, and you speak that, and you accept only that in terms of who you spend your time with, then you'll be on the path of light, and you'll have moved up into a next level of Mapam, especially, and perhaps necessarily backed up by spiritual practice. Now, I don't know whether it's possible without spiritual practice. I can't see the point in trying. Do something to deepen your commitment to light. Why wouldn't you? Of course you would. So going along with spiritual practice, this is the way through which the life force, the vitality, the wisdom can enter us through our spiritual practices. That's how it works, especially and perhaps necessarily when we concentrate on them fully and properly. So we can see how this suits the North Node very well indeed. The North Node is all about spiritual awakening. I like what James Jones says on this particular degree. Taurus 7, a Woman of Samaria. This is a symbol of the unimpeachable divinity which characterizes man's nature at root, represented here by his instinct for higher things. As he yet plumbs all experience to the depths and welcomes life almost indiscriminately into the uttermost inner reaches of his being. Implicit in the reverse symbolism of this famous amoral figure of biblical times is an indomitability of striving for real and gratifying self-fulfillments. The word is awakening. When positive, the degree is absolute and wholly impersonal self-giving in the hope of an honest self-realization. And when negative, a debasing and carefree dissoluteness, accepted in compensation for the unattained and more enduring satisfactions. It's a very, very tight balance between self-expression and self-indulgence. To deny your desire nature is clearly not a spiritual principle, and yet to overindulge it carries with it the danger of a lifestyle which would never awaken you. This is the challenge here. It's a big challenge. We are challenged to allow ourselves enough pleasure, enough self-indulgence, but not too much, as a spiritual principle, denying the affirmation of the ascetic. We're not required to give up that which gives us pleasure. There may be that path of asceticism, but ours is not that. Ours is in the world. We are not mystics. We are people in the world, and so we have a spiritual path which requires us to be tempted and occasionally to give in to that temptation. Just enough to show that we're not afraid of it, but not too much to show that it's not our slave master. Tricky balance to find, but I think that is the balance here that we do find. And when we find that balance, we awaken. Now, if I look at the other side of this, the South Node is in the opposite degree of Scorpio 7. We have here the sense of the deep sea divers turning within. An equivalent passion to the need for outer experiences is felt for inner understandings. Depth psychology is as little explored and understood as is the depth of the ocean. It is a recent development in human knowledge. Yet on the path it is seen that a major aspect of our attention is drawn to find out how other people operate, what they feel, what motivates them, and what they believe in. Without discovering these things in others, we cannot come to know ourselves. Freud is very recent in the human psyche. Very quickly, Jung explained Freud's discoveries in a different way that was assimilated more readily into our knowledge bank, particularly into astrology. It is a little known understanding that Jung was one of the leading astrologers of the 20th century. He didn't make it known, but he was perhaps one of the most influential forces in changing old-fashioned astrology to the modern approach to it, with Liz Green picking up on that very ardently and moving our attention, amongst many others, towards the psychological aspect of astrology, which was not much celebrated before her, to be honest. And so we've got this sense of turning within. Who am I? How do I feel? What do I choose? What are my values? What are my beliefs? What do I regard as morally repugnant and morally required? I can't know that except by contrast to others. It's meaningless. And therefore I need to understand others as much as I understand myself. Now when you do that, this awakens something called reflexive self-consciousness, to see yourself through the eyes of another. You understand another person in depth, you understand yourself in greater depth. And more and more and more self-understanding arises when you get to know other people deeply. So those of us that have the privilege of being counsellors, such as astrological counsellors, we come to know people very quickly. It takes an hour and a half or something to do a session, and at the end of that time, you really get a good window into the depth of the client, and therefore yourself. Because I think if we deeply understand this principle, we know that whatever we've got in front of us as a client, that's a reflection of who we are, and therefore what you're telling the client to deal with is what you have to deal with yourself as an astrologer. Worth remembering that. When we have this facility of reflexive self-consciousness, a bit more objectivity arises in your sense of self-examination. And that objectivity is what brings about the possibility of a Mapam Shift. And when you've got those two things, seeing yourself through the eyes of another and spiritual practice, then the likelihood of spiritual awakening is optimized. And then we just have to wait for spirit to enter us. We can't demand it. We can only work hard and shape ourselves to be available for it. And then there is very often a breakthrough in a lifetime. Most of us go through some shift of some kind if we're on a spiritual path, and some of us go through a major awakening if we're ardent about it. And if you're not, that's your preference. You know, if you're, shall we say, a little bit easygoing, relaxed, casual even about your spiritual development, okay, that's your choice. You might be ardent about your family or your career, fine. But if you're actually wanting to go through a major Mapam shift, such as the Woman in Samaria, then perhaps you need to prioritize that and allow the spiritual aspect of everything to be primary. That doesn't mean you've got to give up career or family or anything else. It just means that the way you handle those things is an expression of your spiritual principles, your spiritual understandings, and your spiritual aspirations.